They say psychopaths wear masks. But what if the mask is your own voice? I thought I was writing a story, investigating a woman who seduced the powerful, manipulated the elite, and rewrote truth like poetry. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't an expose. This was a trap. She mirrored my mind, weaponized her pain, gaslit my identity. And before I could breathe, I was telling her story in my voice. For tactics, one psychopath. And by the time you hear this, it may already be too late to tell who's really pulling the strings. This is 4 devious tactics employed by psychopaths to influence others. A true-sounding psychological thriller you'll never fully escape. Press play, if you dare. If you think you've heard it all, you haven't. Hit follow on your favorite platform now, because the next story might just change the way you see everything. Don't miss a single twisted turn. They say the devil doesn't wear horns, he wears charm. I didn't know that the first time I met Celeste Farrow. She was fire in heels, draped in black, lips blood red like a warning. It was during a closed-door gallery showing in Williamsburg. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I was doing a piece on market psychology and art exploration for a media startup that barely paid rent. But the invitation came through a friend of a friend, and the way her eyes locked onto mine from across the room, I swear time started bleeding sideways. Celeste had this way of making you feel like you were the dangerous one, like you held the knife, when she was the one carving your soul with behavioral psychology and seduction masked as conversation. She touched my wrist, not my hand, never that obvious, and whispered, "Tell me, do you prefer stories or truths?" My mind started racing. Something about the air shifted, like audio manipulation, like someone had subtly tuned down the background noise of the party, left me in a vacuum of her voice. "Stories," I said, "but only the kind that bleed." She smiled. "Good. That means you're open." That was tactic 1, mirror and seduce. Psychopaths like her start by reflecting back the parts of yourself you want to believe are unique. Your pain, your intellect, your desire to be seen without saying so. It's a classic NLP technique, but with Celeste it felt like dark jazz. Improvised, lethal, and beautiful. She painted herself as a misunderstood entrepreneur. Said she was developing a platform for ethical persuasion in leadership circles, coaching tech elites on influence mastery and emotional decision-making. Said her server room was located in a trust-neutral data space offshore. Offshore accounts, she said, aren't about money, they're about control. Control. God, that word would come back to haunt me. We became inseparable. I thought I was doing a story on her, some deep dive into engineering stories, social manipulation, maybe introspective conversations on communication for leaders. But really, I was being rewritten, manipulated. Celeste didn't share herself, she edited me. We'd stay up all night, our bodies tangled between silk sheets and philosophy books. She made me question my own ethical standards, made me feel like body intelligence was something more than just instinct. It was a weapon. Sex wasn't just sex. It was psychological warfare. After 2 weeks, she gave me a USB drive. "This is my archive," she said. "What I teach, what I protect, what I destroy." I should have walked away then. Should have known that tactic 2 was at play, the sacred confession trap. Psychopaths simulate vulnerability as a test. They give you what looks like truth, so when you eventually discover the shadowed secrets, it's too late. You've already sworn your loyalty to a lie. Inside the USB wasn't a manifesto. It was surveillance. Hundreds of hours of conversations, bedrooms, backroom deals. Intel on politicians, therapists, CEOs, and yes, con artists. Some were her clients. Some were victims. Most didn't know which they were. And me? I was suddenly the messenger with a mouth full of knives. I confronted her. She didn't flinch. "You're confusing influence with deceit," she said. "This is market dynamics, darling. Human interaction. It's not evil, it's real." That was tactic 3, moral inversion. Make the victim question their judgment. Rewire their cognitive skills. Introduce just enough psychological principles to create doubt, and enough intellectual intimacy to keep you chasing clarity that never comes. I tried to walk. Really, I did. But then she threatened to release our tapes. Not just sex, conversations, confessions, spirals. Mind manipulation framed as therapy. My journalistic notes, recorded voice memos, all carefully curated and re-edited to look like I was in on it. I never lie, she whispered into my voicemail. I just reframe. She called me from the piano studio 3 nights later. Said she was sorry. Said she wanted to explain everything. Said I could bring the USB and end it. The address wasn't hers. It was a building I recognized, old brownstone, abandoned upstairs floor turned into an echo chamber of gripping tales and shadowed truths. The air was cold. The lights were dim. She sat at the piano, tapping a single dissonant note with the calm of a priestess. I want you to narrate this story, she said. We'll call it The 4 Devious Tactics Employed by Psychopaths to Influence Others. I was frozen. In her hand, a blood-red USB. In mine was blue. She stood and walked toward me, hips swaying with the rhythm of a song only she could hear. When she kissed me, I tasted betrayal and dark psychology, a blend of art techniques and emotional awareness brewed into something almost spiritual. She smiled one last time. You'll publish it. You'll frame it. And when the world listens, they'll never be sure who the villain was. That was Tactic 4, Narrative Hijack. Own the ending. Recast the roles. Control the story before the truth even gets a chance to breathe. And so here I am, recording this into an empty room. Maybe this is media manipulation. Maybe it's true crime exploration. Or maybe it's just love, repackaged through influence psychology and whispered with a blade. But if you're still listening, don't trust your favorite narrator. He may have been chosen. The Mirror and the Flame. I met her the night my story was supposed to end. It was cold for October in Brooklyn. The kind of cold that gets under your collar and makes you feel like you're being watched, by your past, by your own bad decisions, maybe even by God. I was there to cover a private art installation in Williamsburg. Some bullshit piece on art exploration and market psychology. A last-minute assignment from a startup media outlet that barely kept my lights on. But I needed the paycheck, and my editor knew I had a thing for gripping tales told through broken canvases and overpriced wine. The gallery was warm and moody inside, walls drenched in soft gold, shadows breathing along the floor. Every piece looked like a secret someone was trying to forget. And then I saw her. Celeste Farrow. Black dress. Red lips. No jewelry. No smile. Just eyes that studied people like textbooks, as if she was decoding human dynamics in real time. I didn't walk over. I was drawn like influence skills wired into my muscles. She didn't blink. Just tilted her head like she'd been expecting me. Do you prefer stories or truths? She asked. I felt my brain short-circuit. Something about her voice, low, steady, confident, it bypassed logic and aimed straight for the body intelligence. My mouth spoke before I could think. Stories, but only the kind that bleed. She smiled. That was the moment I stepped out of reality and into her web. She didn't offer her name. She didn't need to. She just turned, heels clicking like metronomes of control, and said, "Follow me. There's something you need to see." We slipped into a hallway behind the gallery. The lighting turned colder. The walls narrowed. A private room waited at the end, lined with minimalist sculpture and low hums of audio feedback. This piece, she said, was engineered to distort perception using audio manipulation techniques and cognitive bias response theory. Feel it yet? I nodded, but the only thing I could feel was her. She stood close, too close. I smelled vanilla and danger. You study market dynamics? She asked. I write. Mostly, I said. Articles, case studies, a few deep dives into behavioral psychology and communication for leaders. Perfect, she said. Then you'll understand this. She pressed play on a hidden speaker. It was her voice, soft, rhythmic, repeating phrases layered beneath static. Words like trust, influence, ethics, and narrative control, each phrase bending and reshaping the one before it. My mind was racing. It was like I could feel my thoughts being rewritten. She leaned in, her lips grazing my ear. This is Tactic 1, she whispered. Mirror and seduce. It's how we curate reality. How we make people believe they see themselves when they're only seeing what we show them. I should have left then, but I didn't. We ended up at her apartment that night. A converted loft with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, ambient lighting, and a wall of screens looping silent visuals. Surrealist films. Psychological breakdowns. Slow-motion footage of people reacting to nothing. I watched her move through the space like she owned time. Everything was intentional. Her stillness, her silence, her scent. I could feel myself unraveling, emotionally, biologically, spiritually. She poured me a drink, sat across from me, legs crossed. I study psychological manipulation, she said. Real-world scenarios. Cognitive techniques, dark psychology, influence and art. Most people crave control. But psychopaths, we crave reaction. I choked on my drink. She laughed. I didn't say I was one, she added. But I've studied them. And I teach others how to spot them. Or become them. Her eyes locked on mine. Which one are you? I didn't know. We talked for hours about modern behavior, group dynamics, art techniques, and true body intelligence. About how manipulative personalities use mirror neurons, body language, and vocal pitch to blur identity. She called it emotional sculpting. It wasn't just foreplay. It was indoctrination. Then she kissed me. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even passionate. It was like a ritual. She kissed me like she was injecting a virus into my spine, like persuasion methods burned into flesh. We had sex, but even that felt orchestrated. She whispered about social engineering, about game dynamics, about how true leadership isn't earned. It's assumed. Her hands mapped my ribs like a chart, tracing critical perspectives and deep emotions. I climaxed into her control. When I woke up, there was no note. Just a small, blood-red USB on my chest. And a card. If you want to know who I am, press play. If you want to stay who you are, throw this away. The USB was cold. Heavy. It felt like a weapon. I pressed play. What I saw wasn't her. It was me. Hours of footage. Conversations I don't remember having. Monologues I never wrote. Footage of my apartment, my laptop, my voice describing tactics, targets, methods. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was the subject or the test. And that's when I realized. She hadn't just mirrored me. She inserted herself, like a virus into code. The sacred confession trap. There's a moment when fear stops sounding like a scream and starts sounding like silence. That was me, sitting in the dark with the USB drive still warm in my hand. I replayed the footage at least 4 times. It was me, sure. My voice, my face. But it wasn't me. I looked different. Relaxed. Programmed. I was talking about group behavior, work dynamics, ethical marketing, even persuasion techniques, as if I was some kind of cold, clinical tactician. I don't influence people, my voice said. I engineer them. I don't remember ever saying that. But there it was. And there I was, staring at the screen, questioning whether I'd ever really known myself, or if I was just another one of her projects. I called her, straight to voicemail. Then she called back. No hello. Just her voice, soft and low. You're awake now. I didn't ask how she knew I watched it. I didn't ask how she recorded me. I asked the one question I shouldn't have. Why me? There was a long pause. Then she said, because you write truth. And truth is easiest to corrupt when it believes it's in control. I should have hung up. Instead, I asked to see her. That night, I met her in a quiet midtown cafe she claimed was one of her safe zones. A place where power dynamics went to sleep. Everything about it was glass and brick and sterile smiles. She wore no makeup this time. No dress. Just a black turtleneck and jeans. No armor. I'm going to tell you something, she said, sipping tea. And you're not allowed to record it. I nodded. What she said next broke me. And that was exactly the point. I was institutionalized once. 3 years. Voluntary. She told me about her diagnosis, borderline traits, narcissistic tendencies, sexual trauma. But then she layered in nuance. Her words were soft, her body language calculated. She cried once, and only once, as if she had rehearsed the permission for it. She spoke of betrayal. Being used by a mentor in her 20s who trained her in cognitive psychology and market manipulation. How she turned those scars into armor, and armor into strategy. She said she'd tried to stop once. Even taught seminars on positive influence, ethical leadership, emotional clarity. But people didn't want honesty. They wanted outcomes. You think this is manipulation, she whispered. But it's mitigation. I'm helping people survive by teaching them the rules they pretend don't exist. And that was tactic 2, the sacred confession trap. Psychopaths, real ones, understand the power of confession. But they don't confess for forgiveness. They confess for control. They weaponize vulnerability to unlock your empathy, your bias, your protective instincts. They become the broken angel, so you defend them, even from the truth. I left that cafe drowning in complexity. My mind was racing. I was a journalist, trained to spot manipulative personalities, trained in psychology of language and communication tools. And yet, I wanted to protect her. Or maybe I wanted to believe I wasn't just another story she was telling. Over the next 2 weeks, she opened up her world to me. I visited her private lab, a loft wired with blinking servers, corkboards filled with names and influence trees, case studies cross-referenced with intel on politicians, therapists, musicians, and even underground street influencers. She called it the Influence Lab. There were sketches of influence ecosystems, annotated tapes with influence psychology, body intelligence, and ethical decision-making strategies. It wasn't just sinister, it was brilliant, beautifully cruel. Social engineering as an art form. She let me touch everything. Listen, observe. She told me about clients she guided, not to happiness, but to power. CEOs, artists, lobbyists. She designed the personas they would need to win, scripting their language techniques, their body language, even their failure points to appear relatable. I started writing again, pages and pages of notes. Not for a story, for myself. To make sense of the social dynamics, the true leadership traits, the emotional traps I kept falling into. But she was always 5 steps ahead. She gave me a notebook, red leather, handwritten. Her manifesto. Carefully curated, she said. Only for you. She called it the script of influence. Inside were phrases that chilled me. Confess first. Frame second. If you want someone to protect you, show them who hurt you. Control isn't taken, it's invited in. And beneath it all, a scribbled line in black ink. You are the story I needed to make my next move. I should have burned it. Instead, I slept with her again that night. But something was different. She wasn't gentle. She wasn't dominant. She was methodical. Her hands followed old bruises. Her breath landed where she knew my defenses thinned. She made me say things. Dark things. Things I'd never admitted aloud. Not even in therapy. And she recorded it all. That was the last night I saw her for a while. I woke up alone, disoriented, the red notebook missing. My apartment was untouched, but I could feel her fingerprints on the walls. Like a specter, not a woman, but a shadow that knew me better than I knew myself. Then the email came. Subject: the next chapter. No text, just an audio file. I hit play. It was me, my voice, but not me talking. It was a monologue, structured, persuasive, unsettling. In a world of liars, the one who confesses first becomes God. And then, Tactic 3 begins now. The ethics of shadows. I don't know when I stopped trusting my memory. It wasn't one moment. It was a series, silent, deliberate, untraceable. Like dripping acid over glass. One day you're looking at the truth. The next, your own reflection looks like a stranger. Celeste's audio file haunted me. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was said. Structured, polished. My voice, precisely manipulated with audio engineering techniques and dynamic language calibration. It was weaponized authenticity. I hadn't recorded it. I hadn't spoken those words. But somehow it sounded like me. And that was enough to start breaking me from the inside out. I spiraled. I checked my phone, my laptop, my external drives, found a series of recordings I didn't remember making. Long monologues about market manipulation, influence mastery, mitigation techniques. Half-truths, ethical rants, personal stories I might have told her, but now distorted into something clinical, mechanical. They were time-stamped, signed, labeled. One folder was titled, Confessions for Court. She wasn't just controlling the narrative, she was remastering my identity. I couldn't sleep. I stopped eating. I tore my apartment apart looking for surveillance devices. Nothing. My friends stopped answering my texts. I started walking the city at night like a ghost. Just me, the cold wind, and the growing suspicion that I'd already lost. I needed clarity. Something solid. Something real. So I went back to her loft. The place was empty. Gutted. Stripped bare except for one thing. A projector, pointed at a white wall. A single frame frozen in place. A still image of me, in bed asleep, with her curled beside me, smiling into the lens like it was a goddamn engagement photo. There was no power running. The projector was running on battery. That was the part that chilled me most. It was meant to be found. She left one note, printed on thick cardstock and taped to the floor. You are the storyteller, but only I know how it ends. That was Tactic 3, moral inversion. She wasn't just manipulating events. She was flipping ethical gravity, redefining what was real, making me believe I was the villain in my own story. And once that seed's planted, the rest is cognitive erosion. I went to a therapist, finally. His name was James Pollock. Certified, well-reviewed, neutral office. Neutral colors. Neutral face. I told him everything. He nodded, took notes, said things like, "Let's examine that. And how does that make you feel?" I told him I was being watched. That someone was using psychological principles and cognitive techniques to turn my own life into a scripted meltdown. I told him about the USBs, the audio files, the loft. He paused, then asked me a question that fractured something inside me. "Are you sure she's real?" I blinked. "Excuse me. I mean, you've provided no photos of her. No texts. No emails. These audio files, yes, they sound like you. But have you verified their source? You say she's a psychological manipulator. But what if this is a dissociative break? A projected construct?" I left his office shaking. What if he was right? What if I wanted to be manipulated? What if I created her to excuse something worse? My own ambition? My guilt? My craving for dark exploration? My need to be seen as important, chosen, used? No. No, she was real. She is real. And she wanted me to doubt her. That was the play. I went home and opened a hidden file directory I'd ignored before. Inside were new recordings. From the piano studio. I hadn't been there yet, but there they were. Crystal clear. Labeled. Studio. Final session. Confession prep. I pressed play. Celeste's voice filled the room, almost tender. "He's unraveling. Perfectly. We'll offer him closure next. Let him think he's winning. Let him believe he has a choice. Tactic 4. Narrative hijack. Deploy in 3 days. Location confirmed." Then a click. A pause. My voice. "What do I need to say?" Her response. "Everything. And nothing." That's the beauty. That was me. That was definitely me. Only, I'd never said those words. The next morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a key, a black envelope, and a red stamped card. "Come to the studio. Bring the story. Leave everything else behind." I held the key in my palm for hours. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Eyes sunken, shoulders hunched, voice foreign. I'd become a character in someone else's scenario exploration, and I was about to walk into the final act. The door to the studio looms in my mind now, a doorway made of shadows and justice. And when I cross it, I know I may not come back with the same name, the same voice, or any truth at all. But I'll go, because whatever happens next, she's still writing it, and I need to see the final page. Narrative hijack. The studio was colder than I expected. An old building in Bushwick, tucked between a shuttered bakery and a graffitied mechanic's shop. 3rd floor. No elevator. The kind of place where echoes are older than the walls. The key worked. The door creaked open, revealing a single grand piano beneath a cracked skylight, dust motes dancing in filtered gold. A wall of mirrors reflected the room endlessly, each frame showing me versions of myself I didn't trust anymore. And there she was, Celeste Farrow, wearing the same black dress from the night we met, as if time had looped back on itself. Her hair was pinned up. Her feet were bare. Her back was to me. She pressed one note on the piano, low, lingering, unresolved. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. "To end this," I said. She turned, calm, radiant, a touch of sorrow in her eyes. But it wasn't real. It was the practiced sadness of a master manipulator. "No," she said. "You're here to rewrite it." There was a small mic on a stand, a recorder on the table, a blood-red USB sitting in front of it. "This," she said, "is Tactic 4, Narrative Hijack. You don't erase someone. You replace them. You insert your version of their story so deeply that even they start to question what happened." I stayed silent. She walked toward me, slow and deliberate. Her voice now soft, melodic. PS1 loading screen soft. Something intimate. She was already layering her influence psychology into my breathing pattern. She held up a mirror. "You're not who you were when this began," she said. "You've evolved. You've adapted. That's what this was always about, engineering leadership under fire." I looked into the mirror. I didn't see fear. I saw conviction. Maybe hers. Maybe mine. I couldn't tell anymore. She pressed record. "Tell your story," she said. So I did. I told everything. From the gallery to the sex to the shadows. I admitted things I never told anyone. I whispered about behavioral support, game dynamics, the way she made me feel like a god and a ghost at the same time. I spoke for what felt like hours. When I stopped, she walked over and pressed stop. "There," she whispered. Now you own it. I should have left. Should have grabbed the USB and run. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning for weeks. Why me? She paused. You were curious enough to follow, but arrogant enough to think you could control the fire, she said. I needed a narrator, a vessel, a witness, and most of all, I needed you to believe it was your idea. I stared at her, at the mirrors, at the recorder. You never existed, I said. Not the way I thought. She smiled. No one does. Then she walked out. Just like that. No threats. No files. No kiss goodbye. I sat there in silence, the last piano note still vibrating through the floorboards. I could have deleted the recording. I didn't. I uploaded it instead. I called it 4 Devious Tactics Employed by Psychopaths to Influence Others. It went viral. People praised its depth, its realism, its psychological insight. They called me brave, thought-provoking, a modern master of influence storytelling. I said nothing, because here's the thing. I don't know if I ever was the narrator. Maybe I'm just another voice she sculpted, another tool, another tale. But if you've made it this far, then maybe the story did its job. And maybe you're next.